Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
Okay, I'm so thrilled for my next interview. I have many interviews with very fascinating people, but many of them are not friends. Well, I have a friend now who is illustrious. He has made his mark in society, and now he is an author. So I want to introduce Dr. Arthur Bloom, who is calling in. I always say he's calling in from Boston area, but he's where are you actually? In Gloucester, right?
In Gloucester, right?
Gloucester,
just north of Boston by about 40 minutes.
And you're having a terrible winter. My gosh, it's bad up there.
Actually, Anita, not so bad. I mean, it's been chilly, but there's been little snow. So you can get around, and it's good. I am delighted to be back talking with you, and
I am too,
and talk about things, and I'm glad you're well and you sound good.
Well, you are fabulous, and I reread a lot of your book again. It was quite a while. I guess a few months when it was on the cover of Boomer Times. It's called In My DNA by Arthur Bloom, MD. And it's not the kind of a book that is typical of a physician and a geneticist and someone who has traveled the world. It's very down to earth. It's very people friendly. In fact, he has so many friends that he's kept up with, and they've become my friends by reading about them. You're a magical person when you tell me about Stephen or someone, before the paragraphs ended, I know this guy.
Great. Lovely. Well, he is. They are also pleased to make your acquaintance, I should tell you. Anyway, I'm honored to be back with you. Look forward to a good chat.
So let me ask you, and hopefully we're going to get Arthur down here again, and we're going to have a book reading or at my home, which we had when my wonderful husband was around. And Arthur's very interesting, and we had some very, very nice people, and I now know other authors, and we're going to do that when you come here. But let's get into your book. Now that you have written this book, The DNA,
right?
Are you happy with this? Are you still going to do something like this? Are you going to go off onto some other way, or you just love people and you're just going to talk about the people in your life?
Well, that's an interesting and tough question. I thought long and hard before embarking on writing the book, and it took several years, 2-3 years, and of course interrupted by the famous fire in East Tennessee that completely destroyed our home and took 14 lives. And I begin the book writing about that. That was sort of a seminal event. And then but I had been writing while down there temporarily and enjoyed the writing very much. And I've written several other books, as you know. Yes. And it's been a very interesting experience. I think I write like most people. You don't make any money off it or much money off it, but you write for the satisfaction of writing something well. And that was always my goal in turning to the writing, Anita. I really wanted to write a good book. There are books and there are books, and I have started late because of my career in genetics. I started a bit late on the writing end of things. And this book is particularly my favorite because it really is the best writing that I have done. And it took me years to come to be able to do it, but I always wanted to be a writer. And the medicine was marvelous. I loved doing the genetics medicine and seeing patients and doing the research. But this has been particularly gratifying. I got more and more pleasure from the process of writing this book than I think of almost anything else that I had done.
Well, let me ask you now put your writer hat on. You go from when you were in Japan, from Tennessee, from all these places. What do your notes look like? I mean, are they stickies all over the room? Tell me about that.
No. I write. Good question, because I can answer it simply. I write from memory. And I don't know, but I seem to have retained things. And people who have been with me in some of these places have read portions of what I wrote, and they say, how do you remember that? And I'm not sure how I do, but I remember details. And so if I'm having a koto lesson in Japan, in Hiroshima with my sensei there, I remember all the details of it. Now, I might not remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, but I can remember the details of sitting across from the koto teacher while she explained to me how to play a given passage. So I think all in all, I don't take a lot of notes. I did with this book, I did do several drafts, and I wrote and rewrote and rewrote. And I think that shows, and that's an important part of the writing process.
Well, one thing that I believe about you is you're a very caring individual, and you listen. You listen very carefully when someone is speaking to you, and I'm sure you did that as a physician, as a geneticist, for whatever you were doing. Not all people do that. So when you listen carefully, you are absorbing things. So it's not just a conversation. You are really interested, and maybe you've just called on that in your brain. Hey, brain, bring him back to me. Okay, tell me what we did there. Okay, brain, remember I listened to that.
Yeah, it does come back that way, though, I tell you. And as I write, the memories get reactivated, and it's a very interesting process, I think. So from my point of view, I think the personal gratification in this book, I think I've gotten a lot of very positive feedback about it. People are enjoying it. My next-door neighbor says she's learning from it. Neighbors. People whom I really have not much contact with over the years, but people are liking it, and that's very satisfying. So the question becomes, it's an interesting question you raised. Question becomes, do you write to be read, or do you write for your own satisfaction? And that's always in other words, it's shouting in the forest when no one's around. At the trees, Right. And my answer to that is really for both.
I was just going to say, I knew you were going to say both.
Okay. Well, you know me, so that's the accurate answer at the moment. But the gratification, the gratification in this book exceeded the gratification in my other books.
Yes, in your other book, and I know that we did work on the other book, and we did feature that, and it was, and I'm just going to tell everybody, it was Last Man Standing, and it was stories, and this came from a lot of things. Well, you could tell people about it, Arthur. Why don't you take a minute on that book? That was very good.
Sure. I found the writing of stories. Stories is a good genre for me because some stories will be rather long, almost novellas, and others will be tidbits, sort of from your thoughts, random thoughts over time. And I write stories easily, and I enjoyed writing stories, and I'm now back to it. I've started another book. I wasn't sure I was going to do it. I was reading the story of Philip Roth, the story of his life.
Yes.
And how when he reached a certain age, he withdrew from his estate up in Connecticut and moved into New York City in the West Side. And he spent the last 5 years of his life not writing.
What a waste.
Going to concerts at Lincoln Center and all the rest. And but he found that he could no longer write books with plots because they get, circuitous paths and all of this. And so he stopped writing altogether. But I think the short story writing, it may be an answer to that. So I'm now writing a story about a writer like Philip Roth who stopped writing at a certain age, and it becomes harder. There's no question about that. I think everybody has a memoir, in him or her.
Yes.
I think that is true, and it's very good to write it. It doesn't have to be the best quality writing, but it's good to get your life down on paper.
Yes.
And I think I enjoyed that. But I enjoyed writing those short stories, in answer to your question.
Yes.
The short story, you base a story on little events, and the stories can be short, they can be longer, but they stand alone, and that's kind of nice.
That's why the name of your book,
Right.
Last Man Standing.
That's right.
Well, let me also tell you, then you talked about memoirs. I've been fortunate. There was a man that we featured his book of the month, and he was a clinical psychologist, moved down here, and he couldn't give up on anything, and so he's been writing novels, very interesting kinds of novels, and I hope I'm going to be able to get him to come to our home when you arrive here. But the point is that he has started a memoir writing in his community, and it has brought out lots and lots of people. The most important one, and I just attended it, and I'll just share it for 1 minute.
Yes.
Because people need to go into all their furniture, places where maybe people stored things and they have no idea.
Yes.
This woman she's very close to her mother, and her mother had been in the Holocaust, or at least that area of, she wasn't killed that way, but she wrote a diary, and it was in German, and she had it in a drawer, and when this woman went through, after her mother passed away, she went through the drawers, she found this. And it was a diary that was so important. She's now written a book that I think is going to be an amazing story. So she's almost finished with it. Yes, and she's now traveled in the diary. The woman did travel while she wound up in Portugal. And the essence of this is this daughter now, who is, of course, in her 60s, 70s, she went and followed the diary and traveled to all the places where her mother talked about. Now, this came from a memoir writing. Right.
Well, you see, that can resurrect times past. I mean, it's à la recherche du temps perdu. It's the story of tasting the Madeleine, and then you go on, and it brings back all manner of recollections. And I must say that in writing my short stories, I think it kind of prepared me to do this book, In My DNA, because this book is sort of a series, as you know, a series of adventures, of scientific studies, of personal relationships, and those I try to weave together as I wove my life. I mean, it's in all of those, the writing of the short story, in a way, in a memoir form, you can write short stories and link them together. Any variation on that is possible. So I think that the short story book, the Last Man Standing book, prepared me to write In My DNA, is I guess what I'm saying.
And the reason it's a perfect name, it's short and it's perfect, is because you, of course, did follow the medical path. You were a doctor, you were a geneticist, you practiced all over the world, but yet it also shares the humanity in you. You are such a down-to-earth fellow. You love people. You are like this. And I just have to tell everybody, I met Arthur and his fabulous wife, Deborah, when they were down here, and we had hoped they were going to stay in Florida. Things didn't turn out that way, and I guess that was my question. You seem to be very comfortable where you were brought up, and are you glad that you did not stay in Florida now that you're where you are?
I think so. I think so, Anita, because one of the stories, one of the threads, if you will, in the memoir, is of sort of searching. I mean, I traveled, as you said, in many places. I mean, from born in Boston and moved to New York and Baltimore, and then to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then the American Middle West in Ann Arbor, and then back to New York, and then to Paris, Deborah and I, for 20 years, and now back to my roots here in New England. And I think it is somehow a search for what fits. And as I discuss in the book, I think people too often settle for places that are not a good fit for them. And I think it's very important, and people have written about this, of course, Gertrude Stein, Virginia Woolf. I think important to land in an area, a region that you really like, know, feel comfortable in. You don't necessarily have to have old friends. That helps, of course, and I have a few. But I find things like the tempo of life, the familiarity of landmarks, rooting for the same sports teams, for example. I mean, it's a kind of ease. And after having traveled so many places, I feel really that New England is my place. And so Florida probably for us would have been a mistake. We loved it when we were there. We loved it down there. But this is more natural. The change of the climate, though the snow is a problem nowadays when it does come, as is the cold weather. As you get older, these things matter more. But nonetheless, the basic residence, the basic region, I think I'm from here. And in the book, I remember I describe my experience in Ann Arbor. I moved to Ann Arbor, the University of Michigan, on the faculty in genetics there after my studies in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I really tried to make Michigan and the Middle West fit. And I just couldn't do it. And so when I got a job offer at Columbia to become a professor of genetics there, I jumped at it, and off I went. So now up here in New England, somehow at this stage in life, this seems this is the right place.
I was
long answer to
no. It was a good answer. You're so articulate and you're so sweet in the way you talk. But let me ask you. I was thinking about you when the fires destroyed so much in California. I bet that really felt very close to you. Oh, yes.
Very, very close indeed. In fact, I begin the book with the story of the fire, the forest fire in Tennessee, East Tennessee, on November 28th, 2016. That's when the fire, which had begun as a relatively confined thing, spread. The wind picked up, the fire, the embers came, and we left barely with just the clothes on our back and our two dogs and headed down the hill before the trees could burn and block our way out, which it did later on for a lot of people. Overall, I think the fires in California, they're just so much more frequent. It's really very hard to see how people live in the region. I mean, Paradise, for example, that town in Northern California that just burned to the ground. These things, it was for us, it was a calamity. We did recover all right, and we left East Tennessee and the Great Smoky Mountains, and we're sad to do so. But that was to come to New England. So.
But I was thinking as you were saying that, and that was my other question. Actually, even though it was a tragedy, you were meant to be in Boston. I wonder if you would have stayed in Tennessee if that had not happened. Maybe,
I don't think so.
Yeah, see, that's the whole point, that things happen for a reason, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, I think that's right. Absolutely right. Deborah was really ready to leave. She was on my case. I was pretty happy there. I was had been writing most of this book in my DNA, and so most of it got written in the log cabin in the mountain of Tennessee.
I didn't realize that. I guess that's what you said. Yes.
And I kept on writing sometime later when we came back up here, but there was a long lag when I just was good for nothing after the forest fire. Our house was completely incinerated. We lost everything in it, and I begin the book with that story. But these kinds of natural disasters, I mean, really very, very traumatic emotionally as well as practically. So I'm grateful that we're in a region where that sort of thing. We have other things here, nor'easters and
Sure.
and tides that come and
The
overwhelm
vortex
the
they keep
seashore.
talking about, the vortex now with the the wind
Right.
and the snow and
incredible! And the winds up here in the winter off
Yeah.
the Annisquam River, and I mean they'll knock you knock you over.
yeah.
It's so cold, and that's when I get really antsy and want to get to Florida.
Right. Well,
So we'll probably come down before this winter is over.
so in fact, I thought if I were a multimillionaire, I would
Yeah.
buy a house that had a
Yes.
lot of rooms, and I would have
Yes.
my friends know they could always come down. They'd just jump in on a plane, come down, stay, and then do what they want. But that's not in the cards. I have one little bedroom that you're always going to be welcome to. Anyway,
Right. Thank you.
Let me say this though, because I don't want to not say this before we run out of time. The very
Okay.
last page of your book, where it says
Yes.
to do this, to conclude, a minimally modified verse from Leonard Cohen.
Yes.
Now, do you have the book in front of you? Do you want to read it?
I have it right.
You read it
Yeah.
rather than I.
Okay. I wrote, I did my best, or he wrote and I modified it very little. I did my best. It wasn't much. I told the truth. I didn't come to fool you. I'll stand before the Lord with nothing on my tongue but hallelujah.
Yeah, I could hear him. I had goosebumps. I could hear him saying that, singing
Yeah.
it. Oh, he was a. It's
Right.
funny. I didn't discover him until probably 20 years ago. I know. I don't know. I know he came down here and he performed, and that's how I discovered him.
Did
And,
he?
and
Yes.
I fell in love with this man. I mean, just who he was.
Marvelous.
And unfortunately, a lot of people really didn't know him.
Yes, I think that's right. Well, he started off as a poet and ended up as a songwriter, but he spent most of his early years in Montreal doing poetry.
I
And
see.
Poets, it's not such
I
a
know.
fame-inducing
Right.
career.
That's true.
But he had a wonderful, and then he developed the songwriting side when it became his major
Yes.
focus.
Yes.
And certainly we
playing
all
was
love
able
him
to
for
play the guitar, I guess is what he.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
He was. He was very good and very interesting. I read his biography recently.
Oh, I haven't done that. I'll have to get into that.
Oh yes, do that. It's really an interesting story. His early years, and it was a struggle because there was an attempt, as with a lot of poets, I think, to go a more straight and narrow path career-wise, because he wasn't going to make a lot of money writing poetry, but he did make a good bit of money, or at least adequate, with the songwriting.
Yes. Well, let's get back to your book, because I want people
Sure.
who are listening now to really just write this down. In My DNA by Arthur Bloom, MD. And you can get this on Amazon. And I will share something with you that many of you know physicians, or you probably know scientists, but they're not like Arthur Bloom. Arthur Bloom is a down-to-earth guy with lots of experiences, and yet his scientific knowledge comes through in this book, and he writes about it. But you will know his friends as though they were your friends, the way he writes about them. So please buy the book. It's just so nice, and you'll get to know Arthur Bloom really well, and that'll be a privilege. I will tell you that. So,
Please, yes.
So, Arthur, did any of your friends who didn't get named in your book, were they resentful? How did you choose what friends to talk about?
Right. That was an issue for me. I wanted to be sure not to leave too many people out.
Right.
And by the way, if anybody wants to write to me, that usually one gives a plug, but I'll just give you my personal email.
Okay.
And it's, my name, Arthur D. Bloom 2 at gmail.com. But anyway, my friends were pretty stoic. I at least they didn't voice any any upset with either the things I said or the fact that they were in or that they weren't in. So I think I did get some feedback from the family. The family felt I might have done more with the family, and I said to myself, I don't want to do that, and make it a family story purely. there's enough of the family in there, I feel.
Yeah.
Especially at the very beginning when I talk about my origins in Boston.
Yes.
But I didn't want to. I wanted it to be a combination of my professional and personal lives, not heavily focused one without the other. And I think the science was hard to write, but I think people get it. People got the scientific studies, for example, in Japan. They understood what we did there, and how the scientific system works. And there's enough personal stuff in there for sure. But I didn't want to go whole hog on the family, so I got some feedback from them on that.
That's very true. Bill, besides writing some other books, he wrote an autobiography, and it was amazing that his daughter who read it, said, "Well, how come you said that? And I'm sorry that you said that about my mother." And
whoa, you see, there it is. That's exactly what I wanted to avoid.
That is funny, isn't it? Right, but that's
a good
okay.
One. Bill Finley would have appreciated that, and we miss him still.
and it's funny too. I just add one more little thing. I noticed when she was reading it, she made little corrections in his autobiography in pencil.
Oh yeah.
I mean, such nerve.
The worst ones are the children. I mean, in terms of really accepting what you say without comment.
Right.
I mean, they've got the yellow pens out. That's for sure.
Well,
yeah,
Arthur Bloom is. It was so good having you on our show today, and
a pleasure.
We've been trying to catch you. I know you're busy, but I know you're sitting there. I can see you sitting there writing now. And so, Deborah, we haven't talked much about Deborah, but she is the light of your life, and you dedicate the book to her, and she is so special. I don't know what you would have done without having this kind of a wife in your later years, and I'm so privileged to know both of you and hope that we're going to get you down here. So
wonderful of you to say that about her. She, of course, is my absolute muse, my best friend.
Yes, that's the way it's supposed to be. So let's just close with saying, Arthur, thank you for being on our show, and just keep writing. I can't wait to read your next stories, and when you come down, we will arrange to have some really fine folks at our home and do something really nice again.
We'll be down soon, and I look forward to seeing you, Anita.
Good,
and thanks
Arthur.
so much for the privilege of being with you today.
It was my great pleasure. So be well, and we'll talk again.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.